Good evening. Tonight is Wednesday, May 28th, 2025. This is the meeting of the Economic Development Committee. However, we do not have quorum this evening, so we will not be opening up the meeting officially, but we do want to update the public on next steps with the committee work. We will not be taking any action this evening. So when we last met, we had a couple things that we were speaking to as far as next steps, as far as producing a report and reviewing a couple other pending changes that impact our work. So that was what we last left off talking about, pulling together that report. And I want to thank Kim and others for helping map out some next steps for that. But we want to discuss how we as a committee may divvy up that work so we can bring something forward to the town in the coming months. And our charge for this committee has been extended through the end of the year, so we do have a bit more runway to work from. So it was noted that there's been a review of all the minutes since the committee was formed to pull out all the action items from that. And so that has been pulled together to kind of give us a pathway to know each one of those, what action was taken or what action may need to be taken on those as far as recommendations. And so we were going to have a discussion about how best to prepare that for a report, a written document, or perhaps a slideshow. But we wanted to capture all things that have been addressed by this committee, the action taken from those, and other things that were raised as potential things to look into, but maybe could be put in as final recommendations for future consideration. Did I adequately capture where we are at the moment?
I think you did.
Yep.
Kim, you've done a very nice job helping put those things together. So I think we were talking about maybe assigning that out to different committee folks to take a different portion to review and put that into a next step in a slide for us to each draft them together, bring it back together, and talk about if that looks good and what further action we may need to take.
I think one of the things that Selectman Queen and I realized was we spent a lot of time at the very beginning reading over the current economic development chapter of the master plan, as long as, population and housing, and maybe we just there was some discrepancy on whether we were actually supposed to create some type of economic development, but that really is an action item for the planning board to do. But maybe we could put together from the data we found and what we found, what has actually some of the things that have changed. So from that economic development chapter to now. I mean, that is a way to maybe start off, since that's the way the committee started, was kind of reviewing that. It was just a thought. That was one of the things that was discussed. There are some bullet points that I believe Mrs. Gandia put into the document further down. The survey results are already connected to this document as an appendix. But certainly there's a lot of other data that we collected, which is very different from the data that's in the current economic development chapter.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us were impressed with the different data sources that were provided or developed through this process. I think cataloging those would be helpful because whoever runs with this for a next step can use those as a starting point, for sure.
I think one of the other questions that came up as we were doing this review was two things that have already changed, right? So the zoning ordinance that got passed this past town meeting, and kind of the discussion on the state property, which we know at this point is not going any further. The state's not looking to make any changes.
They're not, so we have that confirmed, okay.
Yes. Except for the one change that in the south end, which will become a pipeline for Pennachuck water.
Any other updates that we should be aware of at this time that we may need to look further into that we've not yet addressed?
I think the only item that we identified from the last meeting that really hasn't been discussed, there were two items that we left off. We wanted to look at that, outside vendor and their data. We did that. It's there. I'm not sure it's what Litchfield is interested in or really needs at this point. The other was whether we had any zoning recommendations. And I think for that, we really need Mrs. Gandhi and Mr. Macara.
Okay.
That was the only two action items that we didn't finish.
Yeah, the review of the data tool was really impressive. I think it's over what we need. I think we all very super interesting. I'm not sure how we actually use it, and if certainly the investment is not insignificant.
Yes. Yeah. 12,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ROI for our small town is not there for this.
Yeah. I mean, I think we did decide that we're limited, very, very limited in what properties we have that can be commercially developed.
Yeah.
So, I think the last discussion was whether or not we feather properties in. That was one of the items that kept coming up in a lot of the minutes and a lot of the discussion was, could they be feathered in, but I'm not sure what that really meant, or people wanted to further develop that thought.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good example of, I think, what's coming out of this work is, right, there's potential things that could be reviewed if next steps will be taken, right? So the feathering in like that would take over time and a change in the zoning to allow businesses to come into properties that were previously zoned residential, is my understanding, right?
I think that's what was meant. There was, I think it would really be helpful, and I think Mrs. Gandhi is probably the one to speak to this more. But the other part of it is this whole historic, right? That the historic district didn't come forward for town meeting, but my understanding is it's gone back to be further worked on. So I think that's a piece you would really need to understand as well.
So I guess for our purposes this evening, folks on board with us emailing the group saying we're each going to take a section of this. This is yours, and please review it and draft the slides so that when we next reconvene, we can have that, maybe not completed, but at least advance to a place where we can further the
Sounds like a
discussion.
good idea. Always good as a world now, so.
All right, so for our next meeting in June, I know there were a couple dates. I'm going to just recommend the 25th to give us more time, make sure we get a quorum, and if we're giving folks homework, I think the extra couple weeks would be helpful. But do you all have any conflicts that you know of on the 25th, or
So-
the town conflicts that would be
Who knows?
We don't
Yeah,
exactly know.
right at the precipice of summer? So
right.
So right now, we're on the 25th, so whatever we can adjust. we can actually leave it as is.
I think so.
okay.
Peter, one of the things that I was thinking about is that I missed the last meeting, that I haven't had a lot of clarity on is I would assume that as part of the report, we're gonna have a top 5 list of recommendations. And I know that Laura had been discussing over several previous meetings about ideas for a zoning overlay district. Do we expand the zone up or contract to different zones, all that type of stuff. I would think that that would be a recommendation as part of this report, right? And that's something I think it would, if we do go that route, I think that's something that, the committee's gotta take a look at and agree to. We just can't like write a section on it without having full buy-in by the folks on the committee. So I don't know if that, I watched the meetings that I missed, but I don't know if I missed that, but I'm just like not seeing concrete recommendations.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I think a lot of that works into the feathering in portion and all the historic stuff too. That's all gonna tie in together to work in one big package that we'll have to deal with, so. Cause the historic is gonna tie way into the northern area of town and they're gonna do it differently than the southern part of town, so. You know,
Yep.
I'll remember I put that off till we have better info from other parts of the town. So historic, for example, would be a good thing to hear back from on that, on their side,
Right.
on what they're trying to, well, I know they're reworking the proposal, on what they wanna try to get out of this, as far as it affect mostly 3A stuff, so. You know,
Yeah, I agree. I think the hope was that we would have, Mrs. Colby here with that piece of information, historic, and then, Mrs. Gandio was working with Mr. Mankara, on
Yeah.
some ideas for zoning. So I agree, we need that part.
zoning can still be adjusted to include the historic stuff, but it might cause some hiccups with what their plan is and the result they want out of what they're trying to do, so.
Right,
you know.
because if you're looking at an overlay, and that's exactly where they're looking to place a historic district, you've got
Yep.
you've got an issue.
So if we want to add in feathering for commercial, then we can't take a building down, that wouldn't be very helpful to to anybody. So,
Right,
yeah.
and I think they were very specific to the types of buildings that they were looking to preserve.
Right.
And so, having a better idea of that picture.
Yeah. Also, they're trying to fine tune the area they're trying to cover with the districts and what that encompasses as far as how much of the lot is included within just the current building space. So there's a whole bunch of different details that have to be ironed out on that side.
Right. So maybe we start with the other sections. I mean, we did put on the portal all the data, the surveys out there. I mean, maybe we could, make a summary of the survey, the steps we took to deliver it, some of the results. But even then, it's difficult to interpret some of the survey. Selectman Queenan and I were discussing this as we were doing the review. You have some various ideas. So a lot of the data showed that people were looking for tax relief. But and that was one of their reasons for commercial or more economic development. But they wanted to retain, the small town feel and the culture of Litchfield. So we didn't really know. Someone's got to qualify that, because probably from the land that you have available, you may not get as much tax relief as you're looking for, if that's what people's objective really was. So, kind of understanding that there's different reasons for economic development.
Really start on that part is summarizing the survey based on results, at least get that part worked on now.
Yeah, but to your point, Jason, I think, we've not had those discussions yet about concrete recommendations.
Yep.
Right, but I think, as you're speaking, Kim, there's things that I think are being raised up as things that would be helpful, including the report, such as these recommendations for sure, but also options, right?
Mhm.
And findings, right? Like this is what we discovered through the survey, through the focus groups, and all these things I think will have utility for whatever next step may occur there. Yeah. And we'll start that work with putting together the slides, and I think that will inform those next conversations.
Yeah.
Is there anything else folks would like to discuss this evening? And with that, we will end our conversation for